inspired by that, and we'll have many questions for you afterward. Our final presentation is a joint presentation brought to us by All Things Considered, something I'm sure you're all familiar with, and we welcome Jacki Lyden, who is the host and senior correspondent on National Public Radio's Weekend All Things Considered, and Davar Ardalan, who is a producer at NPR's Weekend All Things Considered. Among other things, these women have many more accomplishments. You can read in the book. We welcome them for the final presentation of the panel.
Good morning, everybody. It's really a pleasure to be here. And we want to talk this morning, Davar and I would like to share with you some of our experiences at National Public Radio about producing stories about women. And you'll be both seeing pictures from our work and as efficiently as we can, you'll be hearing snippets of tape from some of these stories. Our feeling was that the stories are the way that we define ourselves. They're also the way that we empower ourselves. In the beginning, as we all know, is the word, and after that, of course, very quickly came the photograph opportunity. Journalists have deployed tools like this to tell stories and message change for a very long time. But it's really only in the last little while, 5 to 10 years, that many people who are disempowered, and we heard about that this morning, and that certainly includes a lot of women all over the world, have been able to use the internet to tell their stories, which is, of course, the word made into speed and sound and picture. And our talk today is about how to tell stories, no matter the medium, and what impact they've had on the people who tell them and on those who hear them. Today, women are going boldly to all kinds of frontiers. It's inspiring but hardly surprising to read about a female doctor performing self-surgery in Antarctica while getting advice from doctors over the internet, or that women have taken it upon themselves to start selling drugs in the high Atlas Mountains of Morocco over the internet. And I think both of these are examples of women helping themselves and helping other women, something the news industry has paid quite a bit of attention to, I would argue, in recent years. While it's hardly a perfect vehicle, it's always paying more, the news industry has, Davar and I think, helped cement the women's movement into reality, particularly around the issues of legal equality that women have gained over this past generation. The media has made some of these realities visible and audible and manifest.
And so in making even more, it's even more important for women such as yourselves to continue relaying your stories to your own communities and, in effect, to the world. It is those first-hand testimonials that often get the most press and recognition, stories that tell of one woman's struggle. And this is evident in the types of feedback we get from our listeners at National Public Radio. It is the story of the soul struggle that empower other people in similar situations to carry on and to have hope, or to inspire them to want to change their own predicaments. What Jacki and I have done in the last 6 years of working together at NPR is try to tell stories about a woman's place in a given society, and about how women push that society for equality, and about sharing experiences between two cultures. And all of our stories are available in archive form via the internet. We've told these stories from a variety of point of view. For example, the in-depth story of an American teenager who grew up in the child welfare system here in New York, who had been raped by a family friend at the age of 9. She's still struggling to find herself, but she's a survivor. The story of an Indian American woman, several Indian American women, modern women grappling with the ancient custom of arranged marriage. And the stories of feisty and fearless Iranian women who put their lives on the line to bring about change.
As for the role of the press, long before the internet or the cathode tube or the wireless, and yes, long before the printing press, lest we take the role of our media selves too very seriously, we just thought we'd amuse you with the fact that in history there have been moments where women had astonishing power. In ancient Egypt, Celtic Britain, and Japan, women were empresses. I'm sure you all are somewhat aware of that. And they ruled their empires while men served in subordinate roles. Take a delicious moment to indulge you now. Here's an ancient Egyptian marriage vow. The man's vow was as follows: I vow, and I'd love to have someone take this with me. See me later. I vow before your rights as a wife, from this day on, I shall never oppose your claims of a single word. I recognize you before all others as my wife, though I don't have the right to say, you must be mine. You alone have the right of departure. I cannot oppose your wish wherever you desire to go. Isn't that nice? I don't think many men would allow that in this day and age, at least our lawyers ever think of representation.
Women's participation in newsrooms in the United States is a modern-day phenomenon. Before the 1970s, only a small percentage of women took part in the newsrooms. Searching on the web, I found an interesting survey taken in the week of 1952, the week of April 14th through the 20th, 48 years ago. It's a great little insight into how news was covered in the U.S. half a century ago, and the emphasis on government, sports, and politics tells you that there must not have been many of us back in the business then. And this is something any one of you can try back home. Over a given week, count how many stories about women's issues are published in your local papers and wire services. As I once read in a United Nations publication, numbers can give words considerable power, the power to change. Today it is to be noted that a quarter of the U.S. commercial television and radio stations have women as their station managers, and the numbers are growing. But we still need to work on minority participation. And women who have been pioneers in the business of media in the U.S. have continuously brought to the forefront issues that half a century ago were unheard of.
A woman who served as personal assistant to Clarence Thomas for over 2 years has accused him of sexually harassing her. National Public Radio has learned that the woman brought her accusation to the Senate Judiciary Committee last month, but it was not investigated until the week of the committee's vote.
That's the voice of NPR's Leanne Hansen on Sunday, October 6, 1991. It was on this day that NPR's legal affairs correspondent, Nina Totenberg, broke the Anita Hill story. In 1991, Anita Hill came forward to testify when Judge Clarence Thomas was being considered by the United States Senate for appointment to the Supreme Court. Anita Hill, who had worked with Clarence Thomas, said that he had sexually harassed her, making explicit sexual suggestions or references in her presence. Here's Nina Totenberg.
According to Hill's affidavit, Thomas soon began asking her out socially and refused to accept her explanation that she did not think it appropriate to go out with her boss. The relationship, she said, became even more strained when Thomas, in work situations, began to discuss sex. On these occasions, she said, Thomas would call her into his office to discuss work, or if his schedule was full, would ask her to go to a government cafeteria for lunch to discuss work. According to Hill's affidavit, Thomas, after a brief work discussion, would, quote, turn conversation to discussions about his sexual interests. His conversations, she said, were vivid.
Now, this was a story about one woman's harassment with national implications here in the United States. And for those of you who may not be aware who are from other countries, Clarence Thomas did go ahead to become appointed a U.S. Supreme Court Justice. But as a consequence of this testimony and this story, every major corporation in the U.S. now has a sexual harassment policy, including our own NPR. What we can do, and we hope do, is point out on our show, on All Things Considered, and on our network, to examples of places where women's freedom is expressly curtailed and even punished, the antithesis of what you just heard. Certain examples have been very well advertised, if you want to use that word. The world has at least been captivated by the deprivation, the serious deprivation of women's rights in Afghanistan. In Afghanistan, for example, since 1996, with the emergence of the Taliban on the scene, women have been set back at least a century. They're not able to go to work or school. There's no independent female reporters, or for that matter, male reporters. Women are in complete isolation, and we wonder how much their stories are being told. Certainly not as many as there exist to tell, despite the efforts of various reporters to go in. And none of those stories are, of course, told by those women in their own publications, in their own words. But another example, in recent years, in Gambia, There are plenty of stories of crusading women throughout the world making a difference. One glance at the internet and one finds all kinds of stories about women making a difference in their communities. In Gambia, women are educating each other on the sufferings of female circumcision. Although it's illegal to perform female circumcision in many parts of the world, it's still prevalent and it's still getting more attention. We've seen other women use sites in Saudi Arabia. I'm talking about internet sites. We download this stuff at NPR, in Iran, around the world, in many places. Here in the U.S., though, there are also very powerful stories to be told. And we'd like to share with you now a story about an American teenager who didn't have access to the internet, who really had nothing more but the power of the written word to order and frame her life.
Her name was Wanika Hicks. She was one of 500,000 young people in American foster care when she began writing for the magazine aimed at young people like herself. The magazine is called Foster Care Youth United, published here in New York. Through the magazine and with help of her editors, she was given the opportunity to write down what it felt like to be raped, abused, and abandoned, given up to the system, and separated permanently from her mother and little brother. Here's Wanika reading for us a passage from her story, I Lost My Brother to Adoption.
It wasn't long before my social worker told me that my brother, now age 6, would be moving into a new foster home. But there was a twist. The social worker said that my brother's new foster parents wanted to adopt him. When she told me this, I stood up and just walked around the room. I was in complete shock. My body was numb, and I began to cry. Was this really going on? I suddenly felt so protective of David. I hadn't wanted the responsibility of being his mother, but now I didn't want anyone taking him away. I felt it was my fault that he was being adopted. I felt the past was coming back to haunt me. I wanted David now, but when I had him, I rejected him. All I could hear was my old foster mother saying, one day you're going to wish you had a brother.
Have you ever seen David again?
No, I didn't see him anymore.
The stories on Wanika gave us a chance to look at the effect of a hard life on a young woman, to see how she chooses to cope with her losses, to see what use she's made of it. Wanika has more in common with some of her sisters abroad than she realizes. The world is not reaching out to make a place for her, but in her own words, she makes sense of herself. She moves forward. She self-empowers. She becomes a role model to other young women, and by letting us tell her story, we've been able to spread it still further.
And Wanika's story, the story of a young American teen, has within it something that we think is common and essential to all women. Quite simply, once given a taste of self-empowerment in any form, of challenging the system as she did, women like it, and they're really extremely good at it. And we've seen similar correspondences in a very different society, in Iran. In Iran, we found, which Davar and I have done a number of stories on over the years, we found quite an astonishing amount of zest and fearlessness in the female journalists in the Islamic Republic. One of the leading women's magazines today is called Zanan, meaning women. And this is the cover of a former back issue of Zanan. It shows a woman cowering in front of a man holding a stick with the headline, "Sir, have you ever beaten your wife?" Another reads, "Why should only women be receptionists?" Or, "Is your nanny your husband's doll?" Zanan has one essential weapon at its disposal, and that is, besides being able to publish, moral persuasion. The editor, speaking of the issue of being allowed to publish, editor Shalisher Kat has been taking men to task for more than a decade. Zanan is partially funded by the government, and when the government warned the editor, Shirkat, that some of her stories were disrespectful and disruptive, she published their warnings in her magazine. Iranian women are challenging their traditional roles. In Tehran, more and more women want a better education, better pay. They speak out more about their independence. Here's one of them doing that.
ببینید آنچه در زندگی اجتماعی ما در سال گذشته
One of the contributing writers at Zanan is a leading voice in women's rights in Iran today, attorney and writer Mehrangiz Kar. Kar was interviewed by Jacki in 1997, right before the election of reformist President Khatami. Carr spoke about the fact that at every level of the society, even in the Islamic schools, reformist clerics and politicians are talking about the need to change some of the old cumbersome customs and laws that are on the books that are holding women back in Iran. They are discussing the need to change the age of marriage that now stands at 9 for girls, and making divorce and inheritance laws more equitable. All these laws on the book are being analyzed today, and according to Mehrangiz Carr, we must realize that there must be room for a more modern interpretation.
But we regret to tell you that Mehrangiz Carr's voice has been silenced. Carr was arrested in Tehran about a month ago. It's not the first time that she's been arrested, but this time she faces charges which are quite severe, accused of being disruptive to the order of the Islamic Republic, and she was arrested for attending a conference in Berlin. What news and new media can do well and constructively is to shine a light on something like the suppression of this woman, to tell a story that might not otherwise be heard, to attempt to mobilize public opinion globally, and to provide a forum like this one where issues can be discussed. The world isn't waiting to give any single woman her rights. These are something that wherever one is has to be insisted upon. That means that we need to tell the truth and to help each other tell the truth. It's essential, whatever medium we're distributing that word in, the internet, the radio, the press. These stories become the fabric of what we collectively create together, which is a resistance to any government or society that, like Iran's at the moment and like many other places and like parts of our own U.S. culture, deny women their equality, and to hope that other daughters and sisters and friends pass these stories along.
We have one final story we'd like to share with you briefly. Flipping again through some of the back issues of Zanan magazine that Jacki brought back with her from Iran, I came across an article attorney Mehrangiz Carr had written back in 1997 that I'd like to share with you. She recounted a story about her childhood, one that most definitely has had a major impact on who she is today and why she continues to stand for women's rights. Mehrangiz writes, "I was 5 years old and so looking forward to getting my ears pierced. My mother and grandmother were very excited about the chain-like ruby earrings I was about to get. The procedure, I knew, would be quite painful. My mother took a needle and some ice and started piercing my ears the old-fashioned way. It was quite painful, but the thought of those ruby earrings made it all worth it. All of a sudden, my older brother walked in on us, and all hell broke loose. He took one glance at the blood oozing out of my earlobes and started screaming off the top of his lungs at everyone in the house. 'What do you think you're doing?' he yelled, referring to the savage piercing. 'Why are you putting her in shackles and chains? Why are you enslaving my sister?' My mother and grandmother chuckled. My brother was livid, but calmed down after a while. A few days passed, and my ears still hadn't healed. My brother took me to a pharmacy and bought some ointment and gently cleaned my earlobes. He sat me down and started talking to me as though I was 20 years old. 'My dear sister,' he said, 'I don't ever want to see shackles on you. I don't ever want to see you in such a state. You must never allow anyone to oppress you.' He told me stories about enslaved women and their oppression. I didn't completely understand everything he was telling me. I was only 5. Nevertheless, what he said and what he did have left a major mark on me. He asked me to promise him to forget about the ruby earrings. He then took my hand and took me to a photographer. He gently pulled my hair back in a ponytail and away from my face, and asked the photographer to take an instant picture. He brought the photo back home and placed it on our mantel, and made sure everyone in the house saw the picture. 'This is what a little girl should look like,' he said. 'Her hair is simple and not in her face. She doesn't have chains in her ear. She is free.'"
Thank you. We'll just conclude with the thought that many years ago, when I began work as a journalist, I was very influenced by writer Joan Didion's words that we tell stories in order to live, in order to construct for ourselves our narrative line. And I think that what Davar and I have seen in our work, she has set up a day around UN in Mexico, an International Women's Day, 24-hour access. I've interviewed farm women working in peace effort in Northern Ireland, women working in Arab countries, women absolutely disinvested in the Rust Belt here in this country, is that as people piece together sections of their lives, share them with other people, they do become something greater than the sum of these parts, and these things are not ignored. Someone is not in prison alone. Someone's story is not lost. So we very much thank you for having a chance to share the content of some of what we can now disseminate even more widely and tell stories in order to live.